Get me anything that flies. Just get it here now. The colonel's voice cut through the ops room like a blade. His men were surrounded. No jets available, no time left. Then a low growl rolled in from the sky, and A-10 Warthog screamed overhead, unauthorized, uncalled, and unmistakable. The ground shook, coffee spilled, every screen lit up red. She wasn't on the roster, she wasn't supposed to exist. 12 soldiers looked up, disbelief in their eyes. Is that air support? She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for orders. She flew through fog, silence, and command silence. But she came anyway. This is Veteranbiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The operations center at Fort Reagan was not a place of quiet contemplation. It was a crucible of tension, a world where the fate of human lives was decided in sterile fluorescent light. In the pre-dawn hours, the air hummed with a restless energy, the collective anxiety of dozens of personnel pressed into a single high-stakes moment. The room was a labyrinth of screens, their green and amber glows casting a sickly pallor over the faces of the men and women who stared into them. The smell of stale coffee and ozone from overheated equipment mingled with the metallic tang of stress, a scent all too familiar to Colonel Marcus Ellison. He stood at the very epicenter of this digital storm, a man who had commanded for years but was now facing a failure of the system he had dedicated his life to upholding. His gaze, a laser-like focus forged by a career in the field, was fixed on the tactical map projected onto the central console. On it, a single red icon pulsed with a terrifying urgency. It represented Echo Unit 3, a forward recon squad, now little more than a dozen men trapped in the unforgiving terrain of Red Zone ZK-4. From the fragmented, static-ridden communications, a grim picture had been pieced together. They were pinned down in a narrow ravine, taking heavy fire from a well-prepared enemy force that had them completely surrounded. The last coherent transmission had been a plea, a raw, unfiltered cry for help that had been cut short by the scream of a nearby explosion. "Comms, what's the latest?" Ellison's voice was low, a strained rasp that betrayed the iron will beneath. The comms officer, a young man whose hands were shaking imperceptibly, swiped at his console. "Sir, we're still getting intermittent signals, but they're breaking up. The enemy is running a heavy jamming protocol. We can't get a clean lock." The last message was, "Well, it was a request for immediate air cover. They said they're out of time." The words hung in the air, a death sentence delivered by a proxy. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Ellison didn't need to see the visuals. He could paint the scene in his mind's eye. The sheer terror of being a sitting duck, the deafening roar of enemy fire, the frantic search for cover in a place with none to be found. He had been there before, decades ago, and the memory was a cold shard of glass in his gut. "Air assets," he demanded, turning to face a flight operations officer. "Give me the status on every bird we have." The officer, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, rattled off the grim facts like an auctioneer calling out a losing bid. "Sir, the F-35 fleet is still grounded. The new avionics issue on the targeting arrays proved more complex than anticipated. We're waiting on a patch from the manufacturer. F-18 seconds are all at Auxiliary Field C-9, mid-refuel for Operation Sandstorm. The mission cannot be aborted. It's a Priority 1 supply run to the Eastern Front, and the weather system just north of ZK-4 is a full-blown microburst storm, making a low-altitude pass suicidal." "We have no support, sir. The book says we wait for the F-18 seconds, but their ETA is 42 minutes at the absolute earliest." 42 minutes. The words were a mockery. Ellison ran a hand over his tired face, the rough stubble a minor annoyance compared to the grinding weight in his stomach. The manual, the book, the hallowed protocols he had lived by his entire career, all of them pointed to a single horrifying conclusion: Echo Unit 3 was lost. He was supposed to follow the rules, to wait, to prioritize the greater mission. But the thought of a dozen men dying while he checked a box on a form was a poison he couldn't swallow. His self-control snapped. He slammed his fist down on the command table, the sound a report in the deathly quiet room. "Damn the book! To hell with the manual! I don't care about the logistics report!" His voice was not a shout, but a low, guttural roar of pure frustration. "Find me anything that flies. Anything with an engine and a pilot. A jet, a helicopter, a damn biplane. Anything that can get a shadow over that valley and give those men a fighting chance. I want a bird in the air. I need a distraction. I need something to give them a reason to hold out for another 5 minutes." The staff, galvanized by the rare display of emotion from their usually unflappable commander, scrambled. Fingers flew over keyboards, data streams scrolled by in a blur, and a new, frantic energy filled the room. It was a search for a ghost, a hope that didn't exist. It was in this moment of collective desperation that a quiet voice belonging to a junior staffer who had been at the back of the room cut through the noise. "Sir," he began hesitantly, his eyes flicking from the screen to Ellison's tense back, We have one pilot ready, an A-10 pilot. Her bird is fueled and armed on the auxiliary field." The words were almost a sacrilege in a room full of advanced military technology. Ellison turned slowly, his face a mask of disbelief and contempt. "An A-10," he repeated, the sound laced with a scorn so potent it felt like a physical slap. "That thing's a relic, a flying antique! A bulldozer with wings and a cannon." His voice rose, the anger now directed at the absurdity of the suggestion. "I'm asking for a surgical tool, a stealth asset, something that can go in, hit the target, and get out without being seen. I'm not asking for a rusty hammer from a museum. Get me a jet, a real jet with real capabilities, not some flying fossil that's older than most of the pilots here." He dismissed the young officer with a contemptuous wave of his hand, turning his back on him completely. The moment of audacity was over, replaced by the grim reality that there were no options. He returned to the tactical map, his mind now resigned to the grim inevitability of the outcome. The F-18 seconds would arrive in 40 minutes. The after-action report would be filed. He would have to explain to a grieving family why their son died while waiting for protocol to play out. It was a cold, bitter thought, one that had haunted commanders for generations. And then a new voice broke through the low hum of the room. It was the radar tech, a grizzled veteran named Miller, his voice a low monotone that was now laced with an unmistakable note of alarm. "Sir, I have a new contact." The words brought the room to a dead stop. Ellison froze, his hand hovering over the map. "ID it," he ordered, his voice suddenly calm, all emotion drained away. This was his world, his domain. An unknown contact was a threat, and a threat required immediate action. "Negative ID, sir," Miller replied, his fingers flying across the console. "No transponder signal. No IF. It's a ghost blip, but it's not a malfunction. I'm getting a clear signature, low altitude, hugging the terrain. It's moving fast, and its heading is locked on ZK-4. The room's collective attention, 100 pairs of eyes, all shifted to the radar tech screen. A small, vibrant green blip was slicing through the digital map, a silent, unauthorized intrusion. It was moving with an unnerving purpose, a single-minded determination that defied all logic. It wasn't just a plane, it was an anomaly. Ellison's blood ran cold. He knew that signature. He knew that flight profile, the way it used the hills and ravines to stay below radar, the precise, almost reckless speed at which it was closing the gap. It was not the flight of a rookie, and it was certainly not the flight of a sanctioned asset. It was the flight of a hunter, an apex predator moving in for the kill. He felt a shiver of dread creep up his spine. This was more than just a rogue pilot. This was a spectre from his past, a nightmare he had long since tried to bury. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting the young officer who had first suggested the A-10. The young man's face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He spoke, not to Ellison, but to the room, to the ghost on the screen, a whisper that was a testament to a legend. There's only one pilot who'd fly like that, and she's not supposed to exist. The words were a key, unlocking a door to a past Ellison had tried to keep sealed. His mind, a fortress of logic and reason, was suddenly breached by a flood of memories from a mission years ago. Operation Red Dagger, the comms blackout, the brutal efficiency of the enemy jammers, the desperate dying calls from a forward squadron. The system had failed then, just as it had now. The F-18 seconds were too far out. The F-35 seconds were grounded. The order had come down from on high. Stand down. Wait. But one pilot had refused, a young woman with a steely gaze and a reputation for being an unyielding maverick. Elena Marquez, her call sign, Falcon 7. Ellison remembered watching the radar screen, a frantic, horrifying dance of light as her A-10, an anachronism even then, had flown straight into the fire, ignoring every direct order, every threat of court-martial. She had flown in blind, relying on nothing but her own visual cues and a deep intrinsic understanding of the battlefield. The system had condemned her, grounded her, stripped her of her rank and her career for her defiance, but she had saved 19 men that day, 19 lives that command had written off. 19 lives that were still breathing because she had decided that duty to one's fellow soldiers superseded duty to a set of rules. The flashback, vivid and brutal, receded, leaving Ellison standing in the present, staring at the green blip on the radar screen. It was Falcon 7. The same flight profile, the same reckless, determined course, the same defiance of all logic, all protocol, all common sense. She had heard the call, the cry of Echo Unit 3, and she was answering it, just as she had all those years ago. A ghost pilot, in a ghost jet, flying to save a ghost squad. He felt a profound sense of awe, dread, and a reluctant, grudging respect. He knew what she was about to do, and he knew with a certainty that was both chilling and inspiring that nothing in this room, no order he could give, would be able to stop her. The game had just changed, and the one person who wasn't even supposed to exist had just taken control of the board. Viet Bang Ting An, the operations center at Fort Regan, remained in a state of suspended animation, the low, persistent hum of the server racks the only constant in a room now completely devoid of chatter. Every eye was riveted to the radar screen, to the single green blip that sliced through the digital map with an unnerving sense of purpose. Colonel Marcus Ellison stood at the console. The junior officer's whispered words, "She's not supposed to exist," still echoing in the hollow silence. A profound shift had occurred in his posture. The rigid commander had been replaced by a man transfixed, caught in the undertow of a past he had worked hard to bury. He was a man of protocol, a firm believer in the rigid structure of military command, but the ghost of Falcon 7 was a spectre that operated outside those bounds, a living contradiction to everything he believed in. His mind, a fortress built on logic and procedure, was under siege. The voiceover narration reflected his internal struggle. She's a liability, a direct violation of standing orders, a rogue actor with no accountability. To allow this to proceed would be to sanction anarchy, to undermine the very chain of command that holds us all together. But another voice, a quieter, more primal one, whispered a different truth. She's also our only option, the only hope for a dozen men who are about to become a grim statistic. The system has failed them. and the only one who can fix it is the one the system cast out. The contradiction was a poison, a silent war waging within the mind of the commanding officer. Ellison reached for the comms mic, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly. He squared his shoulders, pushing the internal conflict aside to assume the mantle of command one last time. His voice, when it came, was a cold, hard stone, cutting through the silence of the room. Unidentified A-10, state your ID and return to base. That's a direct order. There was a finality in his tone, a last-ditch attempt to rein in the wild card, to pull the rogue element back into the fold of order and control. He was testing her, seeing if the fire of her past defiance had been tempered by years of forced retirement. Nothing, only the hiss of static. The radar tech, Miller, glanced up, a new line of worry etched on his face. "Sir, she's flying comms silent. She's not receiving, or she's choosing not to respond. But her flight path is locked, dead on for Echo 3's last known position." The words confirmed Ellison's worst fear. This was not a mistake. This was a deliberate act of will. Falcon 7 knew the rules, and she had already decided to break them. Ellison gripped a mic tighter, his knuckles white. "Falcon 7, he tried again, his voice now a low, menacing growl. "I know who you are. This is a direct command. You are not cleared for this operation. Return to base immediately. Do not force me to classify you as a hostile." The last threat was an empty one, and they both knew it. He wouldn't shoot down an American pilot who was flying to save a squad of American soldiers. He was caught in a perfect paradox, a trap of his own making. Then a miracle or a curse, a clear, calm and utterly focused female voice broke through the static, a stark contrast to the chaos of the moment. "This is Falcon 7. I hear you, Colonel. Echo 3 needs help. I am in position to give it." Her voice was not defiant. It wasn't arrogant. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet authority of a professional who knew her job and her purpose. She wasn't arguing with him. She was simply stating the mission parameters as she saw them. A mission that transcended any orders he could give. A beat of agonizing silence filled the room. Ellison's mind raced. He could stand on ceremony. He could insist on procedure. He could order her to return to base, knowing full well that she would refuse and that Echo 3 would be slaughtered while they debated the merits of the rulebook. Or he could grant her the permission she didn't need, acknowledge the one truth that mattered. Those men were going to die without her. It was in this agonizing moment of indecision that the comms officer's console crackled to life with a fresh, raw transmission from the ground. "Any air support at all, please. We're out of time. We're taking heavy fire." The voice was raw with terror, a final, desperate plea from the jaws of defeat. It was the sound of a dozen lives hanging in the balance, a sound that cut through the sterile air of the ops center and made a mockery of all their debates. Ellison's eyes darted from the radar screen where the blip of the A-10 was now practically on top of Echo 3 Feet's position to the central tactical map, where the red icon was now surrounded by a swarm of enemy markers. He slammed his hand on the mic, his eyes closing for a brief, agonizing moment. The decision was no longer his. It had been made for him by the cries of his men. The rules had been rendered irrelevant by the unblinking reality of the battlefield. He took a deep breath. His voice, when it came, was not a command, but a release. "Falcon 7, you are cleared to engage." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't need one. He knew with a certainty that chilled him that she had already begun her run. She had stopped waiting for orders the day she waited too long and lost everyone she had sworn to protect. The ops room held its collective breath. The next few seconds were measured in an agonizing silence. On the radar screen, the green blip of Falcon 7 vanished as she dropped even lower, hugging the terrain, a ghost of an aircraft that was moving with a deadly purpose. The voiceover narrator described the scene on the ground, the desperate men of Echo 3, huddled behind a meager rock formation, their ammunition dwindling, their hope all but gone. They were facing their last moments, their eyes scanning a grey, fog-shrouded sky for a savior that wasn't coming. And then they heard it, not the distant rumble of a high-altitude fighter, but a deep, guttural growl that shook the very ground beneath their feet. The unmistakable silhouette of an A-10, a flying tank of a machine, emerged from the haze, slicing through the air so low that it seemed to be a part of the landscape itself. On the ground, a sergeant screamed with a mix of shock and unbridled joy, "That's a warthog! We've got air! We've got air!" The ops room, too, had its eyes glued to the screen. Miller, the radar tech, was staring in disbelief. "She's flying visual, sir. In this kind of fog and smoke, she's flying visual. There's no way she can get a lock." His words were a professional's warning, a statement of impossibility. But the next sound silenced all doubt. A sound that was not a distant explosion, but the deafening, soul-shaking roar of a GAU-8 Avenger cannon. The voiceover narration described the GAU-8 not just as a weapon, but as a force of nature. A Gatling gun that fired over 3,900 rounds a minute. It was the sound of 1,000 chainsaws tearing through the air, a deep, resonant rumble that was as terrifying as it was awe-inspiring. On the screen, a new series of blips, a cluster of enemy artillery nests, erupted into fire and smoke. The infantry on the ground, witnessing the pinpoint accuracy of the strike, began to cheer. A raw, primal roar of relief that filtered back through the shaky comms. Ellison watched, a strange feeling of cold dread and profound respect washing over him. The radar tech was right. In that fog, with all the jamming and interference, no modern aircraft could have gotten a targeting lock. Her skill was not technological, it was analog. It was a pure, unadulterated mastery of her craft. It was in this moment, as he watched the blips of the enemy positions disappear under a hail of precise, deadly cannon fire, that a memory, sharp and vivid, came to the forefront of his mind. Not a memory of a mission he had commanded, but a memory of a mission he had failed. It was Operation Red Dagger, a mission that had gone sideways in a heartbeat. A small recon unit had been trapped, just like Echo 3, but the comms had gone down, the airwaves jammed, and the system, the very book he had lived by, had failed. The order had been to stand down. Too risky, too much of a liability. He remembered watching the radar screen, a grim acceptance of the inevitable settling over the command room. He had given the order to abort. And then, against all orders, against all sense, a single A-10 had appeared on the radar. An unregistered blip of defiance. It was Elena Marquez, Falcon 7. He remembered her flying not to fight, but to shield. She had become the target, a human magnet for enemy fire, drawing attention away from the trapped recon unit while ground forces moved in to extract them. She had flown into a kill zone, not to destroy, but to protect. And she had done it again and again. For hours, a brutal, relentless dance with death. The memory was not of a warrior, but of a guardian. He remembered the feeling of shame, of awe, of rage, as he watched her defy his orders, his protocol, and his sense of what was possible. And then she had flown back, battered, her A-10 a flying wreck. She had landed on a rural road, her engine dying, her hydraulics shot. The voiceover narration concluded the flashback. She was the only one who flew back from Red Dagger, not because she escaped, but because she returned. The memory was a revelation, a key to understanding the woman who was currently flying a ghost mission for him. Her flying wasn't just a job, it was a promise. She flew because she knew what it felt like to be abandoned. She flew not for glory, not for medals, but for the men on the ground who were out of time. She was not a rogue pilot. She was a moral compass, a living embodiment of a duty that was higher than any order, more sacred than any rule. And as he watched her finish her run, the sound of the GAU-8 fading into the distance, Ellison knew that he wasn't just watching an operation. He was watching a legend in the making, and he was about to get a front-row seat to the truth behind that legend. The operations center at Fort Regan remained in a state of stunned silence, the profound roar of the GAU-8 cannon still echoing in the collective memory of the room. The sound, a symphony of destruction and salvation, had faded, leaving behind a silence far more significant than the one that had preceded it. Colonel Marcus Ellison, a man who had seen every kind of chaos a battlefield could produce, was now a portrait of professional shock. His eyes, fixed on the central console, watched as the red blips of the enemy artillery positions faded into a soft, non-hostile grey. The impossible had just happened. The air, once thick with the acrid scent of anxiety, now felt different. It was the air of a room that had just witnessed a miracle, a moment so improbable it defied all tactical logic. The junior officer, who had dared to speak the words Falcon 7, now stood with a look of pure, unadulterated awe, his earlier fear replaced by a quiet, triumphant vindication. Even the hardened radar tech, Miller, was staring at his screen in disbelief, his usual stoic demeanor completely shattered. What just happened? Someone finally whispered, the question hanging in the air like a ghost. Before anyone could answer, the comms officer's console crackled back to life. A voice, shaky with adrenaline and profound relief, broke through the static. It was Echo Unit 3. Base, this is Echo 3. The artillery is gone. That pilot, I've never seen anything like it. Are you getting this? A wave of raw, unfiltered emotion washed over the room. It was the sound of 12 men who had been certain of their death, now alive. Ellison's gaze hardened. He leaned into the mic, his voice steady but still laced with a lingering disbelief. Copy that, Echo 3. We have you loud and clear. Can you confirm the damage? Confirmative, the voice from the ground replied, now with a note of trembling awe. 3 hidden gun emplacements taken out clean, no overspray, no blue on blue, and all with no target locks. Our own systems couldn't even acquire the targets. The words were a testament to a feat so extraordinary it bordered on the supernatural. A targeting computer, the most advanced technology in their arsenal, had been unable to find the enemy, yet a pilot, using only her eyes and her instincts in a fog-choked battlefield, had done so with a horrifying, beautiful precision. A tech officer, a young woman who specialized in munitions analysis, had been running her own diagnostics. She looked up, her face pale. "Sir, I've pulled the logs from the A-10's telemetry. She only fired 60 rounds from the GAU-8. The number, so small, so insignificant in the grand scheme of a firefight, hit the room with the force of a physical blow. 60, another officer repeated, the word a gasp of disbelief. Most pilots would burn triple that for a similar effect. To take out 3 emplacements with that's not even possible. The voiceover explained the significance of the number. The GAU-8 was a weapon of overwhelming force, designed to blanket a target with a hail of fire. To use it with such surgical precision was to defy its very nature. It was like using a sledgehammer to drive a nail with the precision of a watchmaker. Ellison turned to his staff, his eyes scanning their faces, searching for an answer they didn't have. How the hell is that even possible? The question was not a demand for information, but a genuine plea for understanding. It was then that a new voice, older and wiser, cut through the tension. It belonged to a senior advisor, a retired A-10 pilot named Frank, who had been watching from the shadows of the room, a silent witness to the unfolding spectacle. He had flown the Warthog for over 30 years and had seen more combat than any 3 men in the room combined. His voice was quiet, calm, and carried the weight of experience. "Sir," he said, his eyes fixed on the screen where the ghost blip of Falcon 7 was now moving away. "That kind of precision, that's not just skill, that's years of flying where a miss wasn't an option." Ellison leaned in, his own professional curiosity now a raging fire. "What do you mean?" The old pilot took a deep breath, his voice becoming a soft, narrative voiceover, a testament to a truth only a few men truly understood. "I mean, Colonel, that's the mark of a pilot who has flown in places where every shot had to count, where there were no second chances, no air support, no modern computers to do the aiming for you. She's flown in places where a miss didn't just mean a failed mission, it meant death. For her, or for the people she was there to save. It's a type of flying that's been all but forgotten. A flying born not of a training simulation, but of pure, brutal necessity. The words painted a portrait of a pilot forged in a different kind of fire, a fire more intense and more unforgiving than anything the modern military was used to. Ellison's mind returned to the ghost of his memory, to Elena Marquez, the pilot who had been discharged after Operation Red Dagger. He now understood the why behind her impossible skill. The system had tried to break her, to punish her for her defiance, but in doing so, they had only honed her into a weapon of surgical precision, a force of nature that was now operating completely outside of their control. He had a million questions, and he needed a debriefing. He needed to talk to her. He grabbed the mic again, his voice now a desperate plea rather than a command. "Falcon 7, come in. We need your debrief. We need to know your status." The room held its breath, waiting for the voice that had saved them all to respond. Nothing, only the dead air, the silent confirmation that she was not there for a medal or a debrief or a court-martial. She had come to do a job, and the job was done. The comms officer tried again, flipping through frequencies, but found nothing. Falcon 7 had gone silent once more, a phantom in the skies, a ghost who had come to save the day and then vanished just as quickly. And then, a final transmission from Echo Unit 3, the voice of their sergeant, now filled with a quiet, profound respect, cut through the static. "Base, this is Echo 3. We are mobile. Moving to the extraction point now. Just wanted to say, that pilot, she saved all 12 of us." The words were a final, poignant punctuation mark on the entire ordeal. Ellison sank into his chair, the monumental weight of the moment settling over him. He had done everything by the book for his entire career, and it had been leading him and Echo Unit 3 to a single horrific outcome. But in the end, it was a rogue pilot, a ghost, a woman who had broken every rule in the book, who had saved them. He muttered to himself, the words barely audible even to himself, a testament to the profound shift that had just taken place in his worldview. 12 soldiers alive because someone ignored orders. If she'd listened, they would have died. Every last one of them. The irony of it was a bitter, haunting pill to swallow. He had stood here, in this very room, and condemned the A-10 as a flying antique, a rusty hammer. But in the end, that rusty hammer had proved to be the only tool capable of saving lives when all the surgical instruments of the modern military had failed. The silence that followed the transmission from Echo Unit 3 was not one of defeat, but of profound, unsettling victory. It hung in the air of the Fort Regan Operations Center, a heavy, tangible thing that seemed to press down on every man and woman in the room. Colonel Marcus Ellison, still seated at the console, was a portrait of a man reconciling the impossible with the unblinking reality of his screens. He had spent his entire career in a world of logic, where every action had a cause and every effect was meticulously documented. But the last 10 minutes had shattered that world. 12 men were alive not because of a flawless plan, but because of a perfect defiance. The initial shock was beginning to give way to a different kind of energy, a feverish, professional curiosity. The question in the room was no longer what happened, but how. How could a single, unsanctioned A-10, flown by a ghost pilot, pull off a strike that the most advanced military technology had deemed impossible? This was not just a victory, it was a tactical and technological anomaly, a puzzle with no solution. The radar tech, Miller, had been staring at his screen with the kind of intense focus that could only come from a man trying to disprove what he had just seen. He looked up, his voice a low, awestruck whisper. "Sir, I've been running the replay on her flight path, the raw data. This is something else entirely." The voiceover explained that Miller was not a man given to hyperbole. His words carried the weight of a professional witnessing a miracle. "What is it, Miller? Tell me," Ellison demanded, his voice now a quiet, intense force, no longer a shout of frustration. "Her flight path," Miller explained, his fingers dancing over a holographic display that projected the A-10's route in 3 dimensions. She didn't just fly low. She used the terrain itself. She hugged the ridges, used the shadows cast by the mountains to stay completely out of our radar line of sight. She was a ghost, a phantom in the literal sense. The voiceover added a crucial detail. In the world of modern aviation, this was a lost art, a technique that had been replaced by automated terrain-following systems and stealth technology. Falcon 7 had done it manually, using her eyes, her wits, and an innate, almost preternatural sense of the land. The comms officer, a young woman who had been running her own analysis, looked up, her face pale and her attack vector. She came in from an angle that gave her a flawless line of sight on the targets while minimizing exposure to enemy ground fire. She planned her run in real time, on the fly, and it was more precise than any pre-calculated drone-assisted strike on record. It's a work of art, sir." The words hung in the air, a work of art. It was a description that had no place in a military operations center. Yet, it was the only one that fit. This wasn't a pilot who had followed a script. This was an artist who had painted a masterpiece of destruction and salvation in the skies. The room, a fortress of data and logic, was now filled with the silent, creeping dread of the impossible. A junior analyst, his voice trembling with a professional terror, spoke up. "Sir, that kind of flying, it's so precise, so knowing. It feels like she knew where the targets were before she saw them. It's almost as if she was mapping the battlefield in her head." The voiceover explained that this was the most frightening realization of all. Her skill was not just about flying. It was about an intuitive understanding of the combat space that surpassed all their technology. Ellison's mind, racing to keep up, returned to the ghost of his memory, to Operation Red Dagger. He had seen this before, the impossible precision, the defiance of all logic. The system had broken her, but in doing so, it had created something more. It had created a legend, a living myth that was now flying in his own backyard. He had a million questions, and he knew, with a certainty that was both inspiring and terrifying, that he was not going to get any answers unless he could get her back. He grabbed the mic, his voice now a desperate pleading command. "Falcon 7, come in. We need your debrief. We need to know your status." That is a direct command. Return to base now. He was still trying to use the language of authority, but the words felt hollow. The power had shifted. He was no longer the commander, he was the supplicant. He was begging for a moment of her time, a shred of her attention. Dead air, silence. The comms officer tried again, her fingers flying over the console, but it was useless. Falcon 7 had cut her channel, she had done her job and she was gone. And then Miller, the radar tech, spoke up again, his voice a quiet, somber tone. "Sir? The A-10 has gone off our scopes. She's completely out of range now." The words were a final, brutal punctuation mark on the entire ordeal. She had not only come, she had not only performed the impossible, she had also vanished without a trace, a wisp of smoke in the wind. Ellison stood there, a solitary figure in a room full of people, staring at a blank screen. The green blip, the impossible ghost, was no longer there. He had nothing left. He had a victory he couldn't explain, and a pilot he couldn't find. He had a debt he couldn't repay, and a mystery that was now consuming his entire being. He turned to the junior officer who had first mentioned the A-10, his face a mask of cold, hard resolve. "You said her call sign was retired after Red Dagger. You said she wasn't on any list." "Yes, sir," the young officer replied, his voice still filled with awe. "Then get me the files. I want every single document on Operation Red Dagger. I want to know who Elena Marquez is. I want to know why she's not on any list. I want to know everything." Ellison's voice was a low growl, a promise of a hunt that was about to begin. He was no longer trying to understand a tactical anomaly. He was trying to understand a human being. A woman who had defied every law of military procedure and combat physics to save 12 men. The senior officer, the retired A-10 pilot, spoke up, a warning in his voice. "Sir, those files are sealed. Restricted access. You'd need a special clearance, a process that could take weeks." Ellison didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on the blank screen where the ghost had been. "I don't care if it's buried under the Pentagon. Someone just saved 12 soldiers. The system failed them, and she didn't. I want answers. And I want them now. Get me that clearance. This isn't just about a mission anymore. It's about a legend, and I need to know the truth behind the myth." The voiceover explained that the hunt for Falcon 7 had just begun. A search not just for a pilot, but for the truth behind a secret that had been buried for years. The ghost had vanished into the terrain, but her legend was just beginning to be born in the heart of the operations center. The operations center, once a place of frantic action, had transformed into a sterile, quiet library of a different kind. The mission was over, the men were safe, and the focus had shifted from the battlefield to the past. Colonel Marcus Ellison sat at the command console, the ghost blip of the A-10 having long since vanished, leaving behind only the cold, hard questions he had demanded answers to. The staff, galvanized by their commander's sudden, impassioned search for the truth, worked in a focused frenzy. They were no longer just technicians and officers, they were historians, archaeologists digging through the buried layers of military bureaucracy to find the truth behind a living legend. The voiceover described the process. A digital key was requested, a virtual gate was opened. Warnings about classified information and restricted access flashed across the screens, a final defiant protest from the system that had tried to keep this story buried. Finally, after a tense few minutes of waiting, a single file was opened on the main display. It was the file on Operation Red Dagger. It was the file on Elena Marquez. A senior officer, a man who had been a quiet presence throughout the night, stepped forward, his voice low and somber. "I remember Red Dagger, sir. I was a junior officer then. We lost 6 birds and 22 crew in the opening wave. The intel was bad from the start." He then proceeded to narrate the grim details, the voiceover filling in the gaps of a story that had been lost to time. The operation had been doomed from its inception. A mixed squadron had been sent into a zone based on flawed intelligence that had missed one critical detail. The enemy was equipped with advanced mobile SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, and powerful jamming capabilities. The moment the squadron entered the area, communications and GPS systems had been fried, turning a planned strike into a chaotic, blind massacre. Ellison's gaze was fixed on the screen as the technician scrolled through the file, each line of text a fresh wound. He saw his own signature from years ago, a younger, more by-the-book version of himself, on the document that had authorized the stand-down. He had made the right decision, the only logical decision, based on the information he had at the time. Command had accepted that the remaining 18 survivors were lost. The mission was a total loss, and all further attempts at rescue were aborted, deemed too dangerous. The book, The sacred manual of military procedure had dictated their grim fate. But the document didn't end there, not even close. The technician, now pale with the weight of what she was uncovering, continued scrolling deeper into the sealed record, into the part of the file that had been redacted from every official report, buried under layers of clearance, locked behind protocol and silence. What emerged wasn't just an incident, it was a revelation, a chapter erased because it had made the system uncomfortable. The voiceover shifted, becoming quieter, more reverent, as if reading from a testimony carved into stone. Her name was Elena Marquez, an A-10 pilot with multiple commendations for battlefield navigation and close air support under impossible conditions. She wasn't even supposed to be part of Operation Red Dagger. Her name wasn't on the flight log, not on the comms roll, not listed in the mission briefings. She had been assigned to standby duty at an auxiliary field near the edge of the operation zone, a backup, a placeholder, forgotten by a command that had already decided who would get sent and who would not. But then, as comms began to fail and chaos spilled across the net, Elena heard the last desperate fragments. Static lace cries for help, then silence. And in that moment, something in her shifted. The official order came in fast, full stand down. The operation was compromised. 6 aircraft lost in the first wave. 18 ground personnel considered unrecoverable. Command had made its decision. Elena made hers. She launched no clearance, no wingman, no external support. Just her, the warthog, and the screaming silence of a battlefield swallowed by electronic blackout. She had no radio, no satellite link, no GPS guidance. Just her instincts, her eyes, and her refusal to accept that dying alone in enemy territory was the fate her comrades had earned. Ellison leaned closer to the display as the technician recited the entry, the light from the screen reflecting off his eyes. "How did she find them?" he asked, the words a whisper, more prayer than question. It was the senior officer who answered. A man with combat in his bones, his voice carried the weight of those who had seen too much and remembered everything. "She didn't coordinate a rescue, sir. She was the rescue. She flew the shield." The voiceover expanded the scene. Elena didn't search for the survivors. She drew fire away from them. Over the course of 8 unbroken hours, she made 17 separate runs through the kill zone. She deliberately made herself visible. She skimmed the treetops. She blasted decoys. She triggered enemy radar. She lit herself up like a flare so that the scattered medevac and recovery teams could move inch by inch toward the wounded. She gave them time. She gave them space. She gave them the only thing they didn't have, a chance. And on her final run, when the sky itself seemed to turn against her, her jet took a direct hit. The hydraulics failed. The engines sputtered, trailing smoke. The navigation array went dark. Any other pilot would have ejected if the seat even still worked. She didn't. She stayed with the bird. She brought it down hard, skidding into a rural access road 20 miles outside the hot zone. The A-10 was a wreck of smoke and steel, but Elena climbed out, bloody, burned, but standing, and every last one of the 18 she went in for survived. Ellison stared in silence, jaw clenched. So why was she suspended? The question came sharp, not as curiosity, but as a demand, a challenge hurled at a system that had done the unthinkable. The technician's voice turned cold. Her eyes didn't leave the screen. She broke a direct order. Command had classified those 18 as unrecoverable. She was told to stand down. She didn't. Those final words hit like a verdict. Command held a hearing. The tone was clinical, detached. They offered her 2 options. Accept a written reprimand, acknowledge her disobedience, and keep flying. Or challenge the ruling, defend her actions. If she did that, the discharge would be automatic. No discussion, no appeal. Elena didn't hesitate. Her reply had been buried in the footnotes of a debrief that was never circulated, but the technician read it aloud anyway, her voice unsteady. "I won't apologize for saving 18 people. If that gets me kicked out, so be it." There it was. Her whole career, her entire legacy, distilled into one line of pure, unfiltered conviction. And the system? It cut her loose. The same system that trained her, relied on her, decorated her, discarded her for having the audacity to do what they all swore to do, save lives. The voiceover slowed to a somber cadence, letting the words sink in like the echo of a gavel in a courtroom. Elena Marquez had become the best rescue pilot they had ever produced. Not because she followed orders, but because she knew when they no longer mattered, and for that they erased her. But some truths refused to stay buried. And now, she was flying again. The room was silent, the full weight of the story settling over them. It was a tragedy of almost Shakespearean proportions. Ellison stared at the file, at the signature that had put an end to her career, the same signature that had sanctioned the loss of 18 men. The irony was a bitter, haunting poison, and then a new piece of information appeared on the screen. The technician, still scrolling, let out a soft gasp. "Sir, there's more. These are unofficial logs." The voiceover explained that these were not official documents, but a series of cryptic, unverified reports, all compiled by an older technician who had refused to let the story die. The files note 17 unsanctioned rescues in the last 3 years. All happened when official teams were told to stand down. Too risky, 0 deaths, 0 failures. The number 17 echoed in the room, a testament not to a single act of defiance, but to an entire life's work of it. Ellison stood, walked over to the large tactical map, his mind a whirlwind of information. The comms officer, running her own analysis, pointed to the map. "All of them, sir. Every op followed a mission cancellation. And the timing. In every case, she flew in within hours of command pulling the plug." Ellison traced the lines on the map with his finger, a chilling realization dawning on him. The dots connected, the timeline fit, the impossible precision, the silent, ghost-like appearance. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a pattern. The voiceover concluded the thought. "She's tapped into our comms, isn't she? She's listening. She's waiting for every call we choose not to answer." The air in the room grew cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the terrifying, awe-inspiring truth. Falcon 7 was not just a rogue pilot. She was a living ghost, a moral compass in an immoral world, a human being who had sacrificed everything to be a last resort. She was a shadow in the system, a shadow that appeared every time the system failed, a legend who had been born not of a victory, but of a tragedy. And now, after all these years, she had appeared in his own operation center to save his own men. The search for the truth had revealed a myth, and Ellison, a man of rules and regulations, was now staring into the face of a legend he had helped create. The operations center at Fort Reagan, for the first time in days, was no longer a maelstrom of urgency. The frantic energy had dissipated, replaced by a low, contemplative hum of reflection. The screens still glowed, the data streams still flowed, but the focus had shifted. Colonel Marcus Ellison sat at his desk, the ghosts of the past no longer haunting him, but instead serving as a profound, unsettling guide. The files on Elena Marquez were closed, but their contents had opened a door in his mind that could never be shut again. He was a man in transition, a commander who had witnessed the profound failure of the system he had sworn to uphold, and the impossible triumph of a moral code that existed entirely outside of it. He was wrestling with a truth that was both liberating and terrifying. Some things were more important than rules. The voiceover narrated the passage of time, the long, quiet hours of reflection that followed the extraordinary events. Ellison spent these hours poring over old flight logs. cross-referencing the unofficial records of Falcon 7's 17 rescues with the official mission cancellations. The pattern was undeniable, a chilling, intricate dance of a ghost pilot moving through the shadows of military history. He had gone from being a skeptic to a believer, a man of rigid protocol to a guardian of a new unspoken truth. He knew she was out there, a phantom listening for the calls that no one else would answer. But where was she now? And what was her purpose? The answer came not in a coded transmission, but in a simple, routine phone call. A security officer from Auxiliary Field C9, a small, rarely used tarmac on the outer edges of the base, reported an anomaly. "Sir, we have an unregistered aircraft on the strip. An A-10. No flight plan, no transponder ID, no pilot in the cockpit. It just appeared." Ellison's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to ask for a description. He knew. He had a sudden, visceral image of the worn, powerful silhouette of the warthog. The ghost had returned. He gave a single, precise order. "Lock down the area. Secure a perimeter. Do not, under any circumstances, touch the aircraft. Do not process it as evidence. Stand back and wait for me." His voice was not that of a commander giving a routine order, but of a man handling a sacred relic. The voiceover described Ellison's journey to the auxiliary field. It was a long drive, a pilgrimage of sorts, away from the sterile fluorescent lights of the command center and into the pre-dawn mist of the airfield. He walked the final few hundred feet alone, a solitary figure approaching a solitary machine. There it was, the A-10 Warthog, a relic of a bygone era, now a silent, powerful sentinel of a new one. It sat on the tarmac, its armor plating a mosaic of battle scars, its engines a quiet testament to a journey just completed. It was a machine that had been designed for a different kind of war, but in the hands of Falcon 7, it had become something more, a symbol of hope. Ellison approached the aircraft with a quiet reverence, his hand running along the cool, scarred metal. He climbed the integrated ladder and pulled himself into the cockpit, stepping into her world. The cockpit was not what he expected. It was not a jumble of wires and outdated technology. It was immaculate. Every gauge was clean, every switch was polished, every instrument was in perfect working order. The targeting arrays, which he had learned had been rebuilt from scratch, were a testament to a level of engineering that was both professional and deeply personal. The scent of hydraulic fluid and polished metal filled the air, a scent that was both familiar and strangely comforting. And there, on the dashboard, a simple piece of paper, folded and placed neatly where a pilot's flight log would normally be. Ellison picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. The handwriting was clean, simple and direct, just like her voice. The message was a dagger to the heart, a testament to a love that was pure and without expectation. Not here for medals, just for proof they made it. It was a message not for him, not for the military, but for herself. It was the final critical piece of a moral puzzle he had been struggling to solve. She didn't fly for glory. She flew for the men on the ground and for the peace of mind that came with knowing her sacrifice had not been in vain. He was interrupted by the arrival of a maintenance NCO, a veteran with a thick mustache and tired eyes, who had been a silent observer of the entire scene. "Sir," the NCO began, his voice a low, respectful tone, "you gave the order not to touch it. But I've been studying it from a distance, the condition. It's incredible. This bird's cleaner than most of our fleet. Someone's been taking care of her, serious care." Ellison handed him the note, his mind still reeling from its simple, profound message. "Any idea where it's been?" The NCO shook his head. "No record, sir, but from the tweaks and the wear, I'd say it's been solo for years. The modifications, they're custom. The reinforced armor, the avionics, the ammo racks set up for max output with zero waste. This isn't standard military protocol. This is personal. The voiceover then introduced another veteran pilot, a man who had flown A-10 seconds his entire career. He had been drawn to the scene by the whispers of a ghost jet, and his eyes, as he looked at the aircraft, were filled with a profound, almost spiritual understanding. "This isn't just upkeep," he murmured, his voice a low, reverent whisper. "This is love. Someone loves this jet. This kind of care. It's from the heart." The words resonated with Ellison, a powerful, emotional truth that transcended all the logic and reason he had been taught. He had seen the proof in her flying, in her impossible precision. But here, in the immaculate cockpit of a jet that was a relic of a bygone era, he was seeing the proof of her humanity. She was not a machine. She was a woman who was bound to her purpose not by a military contract, but by an unyielding sense of duty and an emotional connection to the one thing that had never failed her, her jet. Ellison's mind, a fortress of logic and protocol, had finally been breached. The rules no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was the truth he was standing in the middle of. He turned to the sergeant, a new command forming in his mind, one that would redefine the entire purpose of his command. "Sergeant," he said, his voice firm and resolute, "have this aircraft moved to Hangar 7 behind security, but do not process it as evidence. Don't log it. Treat it like a reserve unit. Someone might need it again." The order, so simple yet so profound, was the official beginning of the unofficial. The voiceover described the quiet, clandestine transfer of the A-10. Hangar 7, a forgotten part of the base, became a sacred space, a shrine to a ghost pilot and her flying antique. The whispers began to spread, not of a failure, but of a legend. Pilots began to stop by, their eyes filled with a respectful awe, studying the impossible modifications, the subtle signs of a life lived for a purpose higher than any rank or medal. And the strange activity began. The ground crews, mystified, would report that the A-10 was always spotless, always armed, always fueled, and always combat-ready, but no one ever logged a single maintenance order. "It's like she gets serviced when no one's watching," a crew chief once reported, his voice filled with a mixture of confusion and awe. The security officer, assigned to watch over the hangar, would report strange, fleeting shadows, figures that slipped past every patrol in the dead of night, only to vanish into the pre-dawn mist. Ellison, when he was informed of this, would simply smile a faint, knowing smile. "Maybe they're not meant to be caught," he would say, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Some things work better when we don't get in the way." He issued a quiet, unofficial directive. The rules around after-hours access to Hangar 7 would be flexible. No one needed to say it out loud. The base was now unofficially a part of the conspiracy, a silent partner to a legend. When his deputy asked what they should call this new, clandestine setup, Ellison's response was a culmination of his entire journey, a final, profound statement of his new worldview. "We call it insurance," he said, his eyes locking onto the A-10 in Hangar 7, "for when the system doesn't show up." The voiceover ended with the image of Ellison, a commander who had once believed only in the system, now placing a small engraved badge in the cockpit. Of the Ghost Jet, a badge from the men of Echo 3, a badge with a single line, to Falcon 7, who saw before radar did. The legend was no longer a ghost in the shadows. It was now a living, breathing part of the base, a last resort contingency for a system that had once, and would surely again, fail its people. The A-10 Warthog in Hangar 7 had ceased to be merely a machine. It was no longer just an aircraft with armor plating and hydraulics. It had become a relic, a sentinel, a monument carved not from stone but from flight hours, defiance, and precision. It stood silently in the far corner of the airfield, shrouded in quiet reverence, always pristine, always combat-ready, yet never logged, never claimed. The rumors of the ghost warthog spread faster than any official memo could have, not shouted in the mess hall or barked across the tarmac, but carried in low tones beneath jet engines and between pre-flight briefings, passed like sacred stories between those who flew and those who watched the skies. Young pilots, fresh from training, and veterans who had flown in every kind of sky imaginable would drift toward Hangar 7, unannounced and unprompted. Some came alone, others in twos or threes. They'd stand before the old bird in respectful silence, as if visiting a war memorial. Their eyes traced every line of the aircraft's skin, faint scorch marks, custom panels, a hand-modified targeting array, and inevitably someone would whisper, "This wasn't built in a shop. This was carved in combat." It wasn't the tech alone that drew them, it was what the aircraft represented. In a world ruled by SOPs and sign-offs, by airspace clearances and chain of command, the A-10 in Hangar 7 had become something more, an emblem of what it meant to act when bureaucracy froze, a symbol of the vow that no one would be left behind, not if she was still flying. Colonel Marcus Ellison, the man who had once dismissed the A-10 as obsolete, now saw it with entirely different eyes. He had watched 12 men return alive because of that supposed antique. And in the days that followed, he made a decision not to log the event, not to reprimand the breach, but to acknowledge it in the only way that mattered. He commissioned a small metal plaque, mounted without ceremony in the central hallway of Fort Regan's HQ. There was no name, no insignia, no rank, just the silhouette of an A-10 cutting through fog, low and defiant, etched in matte steel. And beneath it, one word: Falcon 7. There were no briefings about it, no speeches, but word got out. New arrivals were quietly led to it, no orders, just a quiet gesture from a fellow pilot or a crew chief. And when they asked, who was Falcon 7, the answer always came softly: someone who knew that saving lives matters more than following orders. It stopped being just about her. The myth evolved. Falcon 7 was no longer just a rogue pilot who defied the system. She became an idea, a philosophy, a quiet doctrine whispered between those who had seen the cost of waiting too long for permission. That plaque, that unmarked A-10, became the anchor for a new kind of leadership, one not built on signatures, but on the courage to act when it mattered most. And yet, no one spoke of her with fanfare, no songs, no medals, just the quiet understanding that she was still out there, somewhere, watching, listening. In the years that followed, the culture of the base subtly shifted. Ellison never declared it, but his people understood. When a mission was deemed too dangerous, when command called for retreat, a quiet process would begin. The comms officer would glance at him, waiting for nothing more than a nod. Then, one untraceable frequency, never recorded, never acknowledged, would be left open, just in case. Sometimes it remained quiet. Other times it came alive. A single message would flash across the comms board like a beacon cutting through storm. Falcon 7 in vicinity. There was never any further confirmation, no voice, no signature, but the room would change instantly. Despair gave way to breathless anticipation, because that signal meant one thing: someone was still coming. She had become something elemental, not just a pilot, not even a legend. A compass, a shadow guardian, a presence that only appeared when others turned away. Not for glory, not for redemption, but because there were still lives down there, lives that the system had quietly marked as expendable. And she had made her choice clear: not on my watch. Hangar 7 became sacred ground. The ground crews, the tower controllers, even night shift janitors knew: don't question how the bird stays spotless, fueled, armed. Don't ask who comes in when the lights are low. Just know someone still believes in duty without condition. Falcon 7 wasn't just history. She was a reminder that sometimes the bravest acts don't ask permission, they just take flight. The voiceover fast-forwarded to a quiet, somber day 2 years later. It was Colonel Marcus Ellison's farewell. He was stepping down, his tenure as a commander coming to an end. But his legacy was not just in the missions he had won or the battles he had fought. His legacy was in the plaque that hung in the main headquarters and in the unspoken promise that was now a part of the very fabric of the base. He addressed a room full of pilots, his eyes now filled with a quiet wisdom, locking onto the plaque. "You'll face moments where the manual doesn't help," he said, his voice low and steady, "where what's right doesn't match what's written. And when you do, remember this. The mission isn't to follow the book, it's to get your people home." His words were a final, profound lesson, a culmination of his entire journey. He had gone from a man who believed only in the system to a man who believed in the people who flew outside it. "Sometimes the real work happens outside the wire," he concluded, his voice filled with a powerful, emotional conviction. That doesn't make it wrong, it makes it vital. After the send-off, a new note appeared inside the A-10's cockpit in Hangar 7. It was found by a maintenance crew chief who simply left it there for the new commander to find. It was a simple message, just a few lines, a final, poignant punctuation mark on the story of Colonel Ellison and Falcon 7. "Thanks for knowing some things matter more than protocol," it read. It was signed simply A-13. The voiceover explained the significance. She knew, she had been watching, and she had, in her own quiet way, offered her thanks. The new commander, Colonel Sarah Chen, a successor hand-picked by Ellison, kept the Raven 13 arrangement in place. She had inherited not just a command, but a legend. When challenged about it, she would simply echo her predecessor's words. "Not all capabilities fit into the standard model. That doesn't mean they should be scrapped." The voiceover painted the final, beautiful picture of a legend that had become a timeless truth. Over the next 3 years, the Warthog flew 12 more missions. Each time it came when official teams couldn't. Each time it vanished once the job was done. The plaque became a symbol not just of one pilot, but of a promise, a creed that was passed down from one generation of pilots to the next. The final line was added years later, a quiet, simple testament to a legacy that would never die. Just 8 words for those who fly when others choose not to. The story was complete. The legend was no longer a ghost in the shadows. It was a part of the air they breathed. A reminder that duty was not just a set of rules, but a promise made from the heart. The story of Falcon 7, a woman who had given up her career for her code, became a legend that was passed down in hushed tones, a myth of a shadow guardian and her flying antique. It was a story not of a glorious victory, but of a quiet, unyielding promise. It was a story that proved that some orders are best left unanswered, and some heroes are best left unlisted, because they fly not for the system, but for the ones still down there, waiting for a savior who sees before the radar does. The operations center at Fort Regan fell silent, but the story of Falcon 7 would never be quiet again. It was a story that began with a command, "Any jet will do," and ended with the creation of a legend. But this tale wasn't just about an unsanctioned rescue or a pilot who defied orders. It was a meditation on the very nature of duty, a philosophical battle waged not with bullets, but with bureaucracy and belief. We witnessed Colonel Ellison, a man who lived and breathed by the rulebook, have his entire worldview shattered by a single impossible act of defiance. He was a man of protocol who learned that true command isn't about enforcing rules, but about recognizing when those rules are a cage. His journey from rigid commander to a quiet guardian of a legend is a testament to the fact that even the most hardened hearts can be changed by an act of pure, selfless courage. He became the architect of the insurance policy, a silent, powerful acknowledgement that the system is not infallible. And then there is Falcon 7, the pilot who was erased from the roster, only to become a living myth. She was not a renegade for the sake of rebellion. She was a hero for the sake of survival. Her precision wasn't just a skill, it was a promise forged in the fire of past failures, a commitment to every single man and woman on the ground who might one day find themselves abandoned by the very system they swore to serve. Her A-10 wasn't just an old jet, it was a living monument to a love and care that transcended the sterile logic of the military. It was a partnership of machine and spirit, a physical embodiment of a moral code that refused to be silenced. Her legacy, marked by a plaque in a headquarters and a quiet frequency left open, is a powerful reminder to us all. The heroes we celebrate aren't always the ones who follow the script. Sometimes they are the ones who tear it up and write their own. They are the people who understand that true honor isn't found in a medal or a promotion, but in the knowledge that you did what was right, even when it cost you everything. And that, my friends, is why this story resonates so deeply with all of us at Veteran Biker. It's a story of a different kind of path. A path not on the open road, but in the open sky. A path where one person, armed with nothing but a strong moral code and a machine they loved, decided to fly alone. It's a testament to the spirit of the individual, the belief that a single act of defiance can be more powerful than an entire army of compliance. It's about finding your own kind of honor and holding on to it no matter the cost. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. This story, and so many others like it, would be lost to time if not for this community. We're honored to have you as part of our journey. Now, we want to hear from you. We've told you about a pilot who flew alone, who fought for her moral code. What does duty mean to you? Is it following the rules, or is it doing what's right, even if you have to do it alone? We'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you would have flown that mission or been the one to leave that channel open. Your comments, your stories, and your insights are what make this community so special. If you believe that some things matter more than protocol, if you believe in the power of the individual, and if you believe in stories that were never meant to disappear, then hit that subscribe button. It's your way of ensuring that these legends live on. And if you're looking for more tales of defiance, more stories of honor, and more roads less traveled, we have so many more waiting for you. Look to the other videos on your screen and join us again as we explore another incredible story that proves some things are just too important to forget. Until next time, stay on your own path and ride on.